Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Teacher's Day to our dearest professor, Sir Doc Ed. I am Marjorie Loresto, and I will be reporting the national differences in political economy together with my co-partner, Jivenna Pizarro. Let's proceed. Next slide, please. National differences. First, what is political economy? Political economy of a nation, how the political, economic, and legal system of a country are interdependent. They interact and they affect the level of economic well-being of a nation. A country political economy plays a huge role in international business for several reasons. Next slide, please. Okay, let's proceed. What is a political system? The system of government in a nation assessed according to the degree to which country emphasize collectivism as opposed to individualism, the degree to which the country is democratic or totalitarian. Political and economic systems differ widely across countries, making it different to make generations or have a uniform strategy. Countries represented by their governments are sovereignty entities. Next, please. So, what is collectivism? Collectivism stresses the primacy of collective goals over individual goals. Can be traced to the Greek philosopher Plato 427-347 before Christ. Today, collectivism is equated with socialist Karl Marx 1818 to 1883. Advocates state ownership of the basic means of productions, contributions, and exchange, manage to benefit society as a whole rather than an individual capitalist. What is individualism? Individual freedom over economic and political action, individual diversity and private ownership are desirable. Private property is more productive, whereas communal property receives little care. So, collectivism concerned with the needs of the overall society or group, rather than those of the individual. Socialism, existence of welfare state systems, is concerned about the needs of the entire society. No one should be left behind or treated difficultly. But individualism guaranteed individual freedom and expression. People can pursue own economic self-interest, not that there is no care for society, but they operate with a different set of assumptions. If given freedom to work hard and prosper, it will influence people to be better, to get what they want. Slide, please. What is democracy? Democracy, a political system in which government is by the people exercised, either directly or through elected representatives. Usually associated with individualism, your democracy is based on the belief that citizens should be directly involved in decision-making. Most modern democratic states practice representation. So let's proceed to economic system. There are 4 types of economic system. The market economy, where let's proceed what is supposed in the quantity determined by supply, demand, and through a price system. Command economy, planned by government, and mixed economy, a balance of both of the above, the command economy and the market economy. And the last was state-directed economy. Let's proceed to legal system, reporting by Jivenna Pizarro.
Thank you, Ms. Marjorie Loresto. Good day, everyone. I am Jivenna Pizarro, and I am going to discuss legal system. So, what is legal system? The legal system of a country refers to the rules of law that regulate behavior along with the processes by which of the law of country are enforced and through which redress for grievances are obtained. Next slide please. So, different legal system. Common law, civil law, contract law, hieratic law. So next slide please. Contract law. Specify the condition under which of exchange to occur and detail the rights and obligations of the parties involved. So example, the United Nations Convention of Contracts for the International Sales of Goods establish a uniform set of rules governing certain aspects of the making and performance of everyday commercial contracts between seller and buyer who have their places of business in different nations. Next, please. Property rights. Legal rights over the use to which a resource input and over the use made of any income that may be derived from the resource. So, in the legal sense, the term of property refers to a resource that it owns. Resources include land, building, equipment, capital, mineral rights, businesses, and intellectual properties. So, property rights can be violated in two ways: private action and public action. Next, please. Corruption. Corruption is a form of criminal offense which undertaken by a person or organization which is entrusted with a position of authority in order to acquire illicit benefits or abuse power for one's private gain. Corruption may involve many activities which include an establishment, and it may also involve practices which are legal in many countries. Next. Let's proceed under another topic. Please.
Good afternoon, this is Sheela Natanauan. Next slide mo na po. Yan. For growth, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Innovation and entrepreneurship are the engines of growth. For this, a country's level of economic development affects its attractiveness as a possible market or production location for firms. Its common measure is used by gross national income, which is value of final goods and services produced in a country in a year. In order to account for differences in cost of living, one can adjust GNI per capita by purchasing power, also known as purchasing power parity. Purchasing power parity means an economic metric that compares the standards of living between two countries by weighing the amount of each currency needed by the similar goods. So, the image shows the GNI per capita and GNI PPP per capita through the world, so we can see that different colors indicates different level of GNI per capita and GNI PPP per capita. For country to sustain long-term economic growth. Pabalik po, sorry. Yeah. For a country to sustain economic growth, the business environment needs to be conductive and innovation and entrepreneurial activity. Next po. Innovation and entrepreneurship require market economy. It has been argued that economic freedom associated with the market economy creates greater incentives for innovation and entrepreneurship than either a planned or a mixed economy. Continues with high economic freedom, economic growth, and richer citizens like Hong Kong, Switzerland, Singapore, and US, Canada, and Germany. So the countries that are back economic freedom also fail to achieve the respectable growth. Excuse me. There is a little incentive to develop a new innovation in planned economic because the state owns all means production and therefore the gains. Next po. Innovation and entrepreneurship require strong people rights. Individuals and business must be given the opportunity to profit from innovative ideas. Without the strong property rights protection, a business and individuals run the risk that the profits from their innovative efforts will be expropriated either by criminal elements or by the state. It is also another requirement for business environment conducive to innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic growth. Next po.
So good afternoon po. Good afternoon everyone. Malinaw po ba? Okay. So, my report is about the nature of economic transformation. Regulation. Next slide please. The regulation is removal of government restriction concerning to the conduct of business, or removing legal restriction to the free play markets. Examples: abolishing law regulating the establishment abolishing regulating the establishment and operation of private enterprises, removing price controls, relaxing or removing restrictions on direct investment by foreign enterprises and international trade. Next slide, please. Next slide. Privatization. Transfer ownership of state property into hands of private individuals. Privatization is seen as a way to stimulate gains in economic efficiency by giving new private owners as a power initiatives or the power of greater profits to search for increase in productivity, enter new markets, and to exit weaker ones. As privatization had proceeded, it has become clearly that simply selling state-owned assets to private investors is not enough to guarantee economic growth. For privatization to work, it must be also accomplished by more general deregulation and opening of the economy. Next, please. Next, please. Legal systems. Laws protecting private property rights and providing mechanism for contract enforcement. Without legal system in place, without incentive to engage in economy, Without a legal system that protects property rights, and without the machinery to enforce the system, the incentive to engage in economic activity can be reduced substantially by private and public entities, including crime that expropriate the profits generated by the efforts of private sector entrepreneurs. Next, please. Next po. Implications of changing political economy. The long-standing ideological conflict between collectivism and who has a population of 1.3 billion to be a bigger market than the US, the UE, and the Japan combined. Gardner Graham Allison on the risk of suicide trap. That wars often happen, even unwanted, when a rising power challenges an establishment one. India has also a population of 1.2 billion, is also potentially huge market, and Latin America has 600 million potential consumers. Many national markets of Eastern Europe, Latin America, Africa, and Asia may still be underdeveloped, but they are potentially enormous. Just as potential gains are large, so as the risk. There is no guarantee that democracy will thrive in many of the world's new democratic states, particularly in the state to grapple with severe economic setbacks. Although the bipolar world of the Cold War era has vanished, it may be replaced by a multipolar world dominated by a number of civilizations. In such world, much of the economic promise inherent in the global shift towards market-based economic system may stall in the risk of conflicts between civilization. Next, please. Next, please. Focus on managerial implication. The overall attractiveness of a country depends on the balance between the likely benefits of doing business in that country against likely costs and risks. So benefits. Function of market size and the current and consumer purchasing power. The first movers are able to gain the advantage while the last entrants face the disadvantages. There are three different costs. Political cost. Political costs include the cost paying bribes or lobbying for favorable or fair treatment, while economic costs relate primarily to sophistication of economic system, including the infrastructure and supporting businesses. While legal costs can be higher in countries with dramatically different conduct, workplace, and pollution standards. However, is for legal protection for property rights.
Okay. This dimension deals with the fact that all individuals and societies are not equal. It expresses the attitude of the culture towards these inequalities among us. Power distance is defined as the extent of which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. At a score of 94 from our source HostFed Insights, the Philippines is a hierarchical society. This means that people accept a hierarchical order in which everybody has a place and which needs no further justification. Hierarchy in an organization is seen as reflecting inherent inequalities. Centralization is popular, subordinates expect to be told what to do, and the ideal boss is a benevolent autocrat. So we all know that there's a superiority and inferiority happens within our country. So it says that the power distance is one of the dimensions or one of the differences, national differences in terms of our culture. So next we have individualism. Adrian.
Okay. So individualism is a degree to which societies believes that individuals should be self. An individualistic society involves put a loyalty to themselves first and loyalty to their company and work group and second. Thank you. Next.
Okay. For the third dimension, we have the masculinity. A high score of masculine on this dimension indicates that the society will be driven by competition, achievement, and success, with success being defined by the winner or best in the field, a value system that starts in school and continues throughout organizational life. A low score of feminine on the dimension means that the dominant values in society are caring for others and quality of life. A feminine society is one where quality of life is the sign of success and standing out from the crowd is not admirable. The fundamental issue here is that what motivates people wanting to be the best or masculine or liking what you do or feminine. The Philippines scores 65 on this dimension and is thus a masculine society. In masculine countries, people live in order to work. Managers are expected to be decisive and assertive. The emphasis is on equity, competition, and performance, and conflict are resolved by fighting them out. So, it is like in our country, there's a survival phase with different individuals, right? So, in this with this dimension, the masculinity, we are scored 64 for our country, Philippines. Okay, for the next, we have uncertain avoidance. Adrian.
For the uncertain avoidance, the cultural differences avoidance is the degree to which people in the country are uncomfortable with the unstructured, ambiguous, and unpredictable situation in countries was strong uncertainty. Avoidance, such as a recent Portugal people, time to be less aggressive and emotional, and safe security rather than uncertainty. Thank you. Next.
Okay, and then we have the long-term orientation. So this dimension describes how every society has to maintain some links with its own past while dealing with the challenges of the present and future. And societies prioritize these two existential goals differently. Normative societies, which score low on this dimension, for example, prefer to maintain time-honored traditions and norms while viewing societal change with suspicion. Those with a culture which score high, on the other hand, take a more pragmatic approach. They encourage thrift and effort in modern education as a way to prepare for the future. So it says that being pragmatic is being practical, and what's the other one? Okay, a very low score of 27 indicates that the Philippines are more normative than pragmatic. People in such societies have a strong concern with establishing the absolute truth. They are normative in their thinking. They exhibit great respect for traditions, a relatively small propensity to save the future, and a focus on achieving quick results. We all know that Filipinos are collective, so we base on our standards on our traditions, our culture, or based on what our relatives will prefer, right? So that's it. So for the next one, we have indulgence. Edie?
Okay, so for the indulgence, one challenge that confronts humanity now and in the past is the degree to which small children are socialized. So without a socialization, we do not become a human. This dimension is defined as the extent to which people try to control their desires and impulses. Based on the way they were raised, relatively weak control is called indulgence, and relatively strong control called restraint. Cultures can therefore be described as indulgent or restrained. So with a low score of 42, the culture of the Philippines is one of restraint. Societies with a low score in this dimension have a tendency to cynicism and pessimism, also in contrast to indulgent society. Restrained societies do not put much emphasis on leisure time and control the gratification of their desires. People with the orientation have the perception that their actions are restrained by social norms and feel that indulging themselves is somewhat. Next, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's for our part. And then let's have the last topic for our report. Ethics, corporate, social responsibility, and sustainability will be reported by Renea and Elaine Baquing.
Yes, good afternoon everyone. I am Renea Gallegos. I will be discussing and presenting the last topic under the national differences, the ethics, corporate, social responsibility, and sustainability. So here is the learning objectives. Understand the ethical issues faced by international businesses. Recognize an ethical dilemma. Identify the causes of unethical behavior by managers. Describe the different philosophical approaches to ethics. Explain how managers can incorporate ethical considerations into their decision making. Next slide, please. So, ethics. How can we define ethics? We can say that this is the accepted principles of right and wrong that govern the conduct of a person, the members of a profession, the actions of an organization, business ethics, and ethical strategy. By giving you an explanation to this, the ethics run of how a business should act in the face of ethical dilemma and controversial situations. This can include a number of different situations, including how a business is governed, how stocks are traded, a business role in social issues, and more. By having an ethics in your business improves the business reputation. Business ethics are the moral principles that act as the guidelines for the way a business conducts itself and its transactions. By having ethical strategy, it analyzes the target markets for information on how many items customers are likely to buy and make sure there is an adequate supply. Next slide. So there are the most common ethical issues in the international business involved. The first is the employment practices. Next slide, please. Employment practices. Suppose work conditions in host nation are inferior to those in a multinational spoke nation. Which standards should apply? Home or host nation or something between? Example is the Nike case. Nike did not break the law, but the case raised questions regarding the ethics of using Sweatshop label. To guard against ethical abuses, firms should establish minimal acceptable standards that safeguard the basic rights and dignity of employees. audit foreign subsidies, and contractors regularly to ensure standards are being met. So, in real world, there are do's and don'ts that must be considered and obeyed. Those are found in the rules and regulations of every company or organizations. The term sweatshop refers to a factory that is guilty of some sort of labor abuse or violation, such as unsafe working conditions, employment of children, mandatory overtime, payment of less than the minimum wage, unsafe working conditions, and violation of labor. Based on the example, ethics is different depending on the nation or country you are working in, so a bit of adjustments must always take into consideration. Next slide, please. The second one is the human rights. Basic human rights found in developed nations are not universally accepted worldwide. It is from freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, and also freedom from political repression. This is very explanatory, for we know already what are rights as a human. This is probably because we have different culture, tradition, and political preferences. They are based on dignity, fairness, inequality, and respect. Businesses have a significant impact on the way we live our life and enjoy these human rights, whether it's as an employee, a customer, or simply living alongside companies that share our cities and towns. Next slide, please. The third one is the environmental pollution or environmental regulations. The Chinese capital of Beijing is considered one of the worst cities in the world for smog, with residents often forced to wear masks outdoors. Environmental pollution. Problem when environment regulations differ between host nation and home nation. Tragedy of commons. Global tragedy of commons. It is ethical for a company to escape regulations by moving production to a nation with lax of regulations. Even in business world, it is also prohibited to destroy the environment. Like here in the Philippines, we must always follow the rules of DNR upon establishing a businesses and upon continuing it in the future. A good example of it is Petron Refinery Corporation in Bataan, where they are producing crude oils but still made sure that they are not harming the environment. Next slide, please. The fourth one is the corruption. Ethical implications of corruption. Are bribes the price to pay to do greater good? Do bribes reduce businesses' incentive to invest? Some multinationals adopting zero-tolerance policies like BP and Dow. In every businesses, fairness and honesty must always be considered. Bribery is one of the very typical examples of a corporation engaged in unethical behavior. A number of problems can be attributed to business bribery. The large oil multinational BP, for example, has zero tolerance toward facilitating payments. For example, here in the Philippines, this is not surprising that graft and corruption is in widespread no matter how high or low the position in government is. Because they are running not to provide service, but for the money they can corrupt. Sadly, the projects they are making are low quality because they are dividing the funds. Next slide, please. The last one is the ethical obligations of multinational corporations are not always clear-cut. How should corporations handle ethical dilemmas regarding employment, human rights of corporation, and environmental pollution? This could be the pressure from customers and stakeholders to be transparent in ethical decision making. No universal worldwide agreement about what constitutes accepted ethical principles. This is nature of ethical dilemmas. Is in accordance of human rights of professional, we must know the difference between what is right and what is wrong. The idea of social responsibility arises due to the philosophy that business people should consider the social consequences of their actions. They should also care that decisions should have both meaningful and ethical, economic, and social consequences. Social responsibility can be supported because it is correct and appropriate way for a business to behave. Next slide. The next topic is the determination of ethical behavior. So why do managers behave unethically? So we have 6. The first one, next slide please, is the personal ethics. Formation of ethics is guided by our parents, our school, our religion, and the media. Expatriate managers may face pressure to violate their personal ethics because they are away from their ordinary social context and culture. Parent company may pressure managers to meet unrealistic goals that can only be fulfilled by acting unethically. So, business ethics are not divorced from personal ethics, which are the generally accepted principles of right and wrong governing the conduct of individuals. So as individuals, we are typically taught that it is wrong to lie and cheat. It is unethical, and it is right to behave with integrity and honor, and to stand up for what we believe to be right and true. So personal ethics is in an ethics that a person identifies with in respect to people and situations that they deal with in everyday life. Next slide please. The next is the decision-making process. Business people may act unethically when they fail to ask, is this decision or action ethical? Problems arise in processes that do not incorporate ethical considerations into business decision-making. Need to better understand how individuals make decisions that are ethical or unethical in an organizational environment. So this is probably because some of the businessmen are more profit of their business, even though it costs them an ethically decision-making or behavior. They are focusing more on gaining than doing what is right for the community. In making ethical decisions, it is necessary to perceive and eliminate unethical options and select the best ethical alternative. Next slide, please. The next one is the organizational culture. Culture in some organizations does not encourage people to think through ethical consequences of decisions. So the organization's culture defines it is the proper way to behave within the organization. This culture consists of shared beliefs and values established by the leaders and then communicated and reinforced through various methods, ultimately shaping employee perceptions, behaviors, and understanding. Next slide, please. The next one is the unrealistic performance goals. pressure from parent company to meet unrealistic performance goals by cutting corners or acting unethically. So this is again because most of the companies don't want to experience losses because it may lead to bankruptcy, and the only option they have in order to remain in the business industry is to do things that are unethical. Next slide, please. And the second to the last is the leadership. Helps to establish the culture of an organization and set the examples that others follow. Employees often take their cue from business leaders. So, having a good leadership, leaders must emotionally strong and has a good sense of responsibility and with good decision making. Wherein they know how to balance doing ethical decision but still gaining from the company, and the company itself is also gaining. Next slide, please. The last one is the societal culture. Cultures that emphasize individualism and uncertainty, avoidance are more likely to stress ethical behavior than cultures where masculinity and power distance are emphasized. So each business must consider that each employee has individualism and everybody is learning the same way because they are learning in different ways and in different phases. That's all.
Ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. It is the only moral framework that can be used to justify military force or war. It is also the most common approach to moral reasoning used in business because of the way in which it accounts for costs and benefits. However, because we cannot predict the future, it's difficult to know with certainty whether the consequences of our actions will be good or bad. This is one of the limitations of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism has also trouble accounting for values such as justice and individual rights. Example, suppose that you are buying ice cream for a party that 10 people will attend. Your only flavor options are chocolate and vanilla, and some of the people attending like chocolate, while others like vanilla. Utilitarian, you should choose the flavor that will result in the most pleasure for the group as a whole. If 7 like chocolate and 3 like vanilla, and if all the same amount of pleasure from the flavor they like, then you should choose chocolate. This will yield what Bentham in a famous phrase called the greatest happiness for the greatest number. An important in this case is that you should choose chocolate even if you are one of the people who enjoy vanilla more than chocolate. The utilitarian method requires you to count everyone's interest equally. You may not weight some people's interests, including your own, more heavily than others. Similarly, if a government is passing a policy, it should give equal consideration to the well-being of all members of the society. Actions are desirable if they lead the best possible balance of good consequences over bad consequences. Best decisions are those that produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Next slide, please. Thank you. According to philosopher Immanuel Kant, the morality of an action is not based on its consequences. Hence, this theory belongs to the ontological moral theories. The ontology or deontological theories are those that focus on ethics involving responsibility, moral duty, and commitment. Kant postulated this theory to give ethical guidelines to people when making ethical decisions of actions. People should be treated as ends and never as purely means to the ends of others. People have dignity and respect. Contemporary moral philosophers view Kantian ethics as incomplete. Next slide, please. So we proceed on right theories. Right theories can refer to moral rights or legal rights. Moral rights are sometimes justified on the grounds that certain interests are important enough to warrant strong protection, because this is the best way to maximize the well-being of all. Legal rights are just rights that are accepted in certain legislation. One can deny that there is such a thing as moral right, but argue for a legal right of protecting the interests or the preferences of those who are protected by them. Next slide, please. So now we may now proceed on Universal Declaration of Human Rights. According to Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal and should be treated the same way. In the Article 23, everyone has the right to work in just and favorable conditions and be free to choose your salary that allows you to live and support family. Everyone should receive equal pay for equal work. Number 1 here is everyone has the right to work, the free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and the protections against unemployment. Number 2, everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. Number 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration for himself and his family, an existence worthy of human dignity, and if necessary by other means of social protection. Number 4, right to form and to join trade unions for the protections of his income. Along with rights come obligations in Article 29. You have duties towards the community within which your personality can fully develop. The law should guarantee human rights. It should allow everyone to respect others and to be respected. Next slide, please. Justice theories. Just distributions of economic goods and services. A just distribution is one that is considered fair and equitable. According to John Rawls, argue that all economic goods and services should be distributed equally, except when an unequal distribution would work to everyone's advantage. This is the impartiality. Impartiality is guaranteed by the veil of ignorance, which is everyone is imagined to be ignorant of his or her particular characteristics. Next slide, please. The last discussion here is about how can managers make ethical decisions. Number 1, hire and promote people with a well-grounded sense of personal ethics. Refrain from promoting individuals who have acted unethically. Try to hire only people with strong ethics. Addition, prospective employees should find out as much as they can about the ethical climate of the organization prior to taking a position. Next slide, please. Number 2, build an organizational culture that places a high value on ethical behavior. Values that place a strong emphasis on ethical behavior. Next is emphasize the importance of Number 2, emphasize the importance of ethics. Next is implement a system of incentives and rewards that recognize people who engage in ethical behavior and sanction those who do not. Next is number 3 na po. Number 3 is put decision process in place that requires people to consider the ethical dimensions of business decision. You may ask whether does the decision fall within the accepted values of standards that typically apply in the organization environment? Is there a willingness to see the decision communicated to all stakeholders affected? Or it's either with people close to me, like family members,
hence and approve of the decision. Next slide, please. In addition, manager can also use 5-step process to think through ethical problems. Like step 1, identify which stakeholders a decision would affect and in what ways. There are 2 different kinds of stakeholders. This is internal and external. Stakeholders are people who work for or who own the business, such as employees, the board of directors, and stockholders. External stakeholders are the individuals who have some claim on a firm, such as customers, suppliers, and unions. From the word itself, internal, nasa loob po yung mga, yung katulad nga po ng employees, like yung mga suppliers, customers, and step 2, determine whether a proposed decision would violate the fundamental rights of any stakeholders. Step 3, establish moral intent placed ahead of other concerns in cases where either the fundamental rights or stakeholders or key moral principles have been violated. Step 4, engage in ethical behavior. Step 5 is audit decisions to make sure they are consistent with principles. This step is often overlooked even though it's critical to finding out whether a decision process is working. And the next step is, next slide po. Continuation, number 4, institute ethical officers to assess the needs and risks that an ethics program must address, develop and distribute a code of ethics, conduct training programs for employees, establish and maintain confidentiality of employees, comply with government laws and regulations, monitor and audit ethical conduct where appropriate, and next is periodically reviewing and updating the code of ethics. Next step, please. Next slide, please. The last one is develop moral courage. Enable managers to walk away from a decision that is profitable but unethical. Gives an employee the strength to say no to a superior who instructs employee to pursue actions that are unethical. Last is gives employees the integrity to go public with the whistle on persistent unethical behavior in a company. In the end, there are clearly things that an international business should do, and there are things that an international should not do. But it is important to remember that not all ethical dilemmas have a clean and obvious solution. In these situations, firm must rely on the decision-making ability of its managers. That's all.